Good morning. I'm Sean Sullivan. I'm a national political reporter here at the Washington Post. My guests today are Senator Roy Blunt, Republican of Missouri. He is the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Operations, Safety, and Security. And we're also joined by Senator Maria Cantwell of the state of Washington. She's the top Democrat on the panel. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Before we begin our discussion, I just wanted to let our audience here in the room and those watching online know that if you want to ask some questions to the senators, you can tweet those questions with the hashtag #TakingFlight. And so I'll try to get to some of those questions throughout the course of our discussion. So let's jump right in. I wanted to ask both of you a question about regulations. The Airline Deregulation Act became law 40 years ago this year. Has deregulation worked in your opinion? And what do you think some of the challenges and some of the opportunities are that lie ahead in terms of regulation in the industry?
Well, I think if you look at the response to deregulation and how many more people fly now than they did, how many people not only fly for business but fly for family vacations and other things, you'd have to argue that that deregulation made it possible for a lot more people to use the airlines. I think the airlines continue to work on systems that hopefully make that more competitive and better. But deregulation works, but that doesn't, in my view, but that doesn't mean that there's not a continued role for both the Congress and the FAA to be sure that it continues to work and address the problems as they arise. It is a huge system, bigger than anybody else's in the world, and whether it was regulated or not, it would have challenges, and we need to pay attention to those challenges.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to the Washington Post for doing this focus on aviation. I think if you asked who has the most interest in aviation in the United States Senate, Roy Blunt and I's name would come up because we see the importance of aviation every day. I think the larger question, not to turn your subject on its ear, but in the context of what's happened to aviation in that time period during deregulation as well. The safety and technology has improved immensely. We constantly keep focus on whether there is true competition in the marketplace. We want more transparency and consumer bill of rights. So it's not just taken in and of itself, but the changes that have happened in the industry. So do we continue to need to be vigilant about these issues, particularly as they relate to consumers? Yes. But we've seen improvements in the aviation sector, and that's what we want to continue to see.
So we live in a social media age. We live in an age of cell phone cameras where it's become easier and almost instant for passengers to document their travel experiences, both their good experiences and their bad experiences. And we've seen passengers document bad experiences that have gone viral online. You know, we saw a man get dragged off an overbooked flight. We've seen computer malfunctions, ground flights. We've seen 2 girls barred from boarding a flight because they were wearing leggings. Do you think that the government and the airline industry has done enough to protect passengers and their rights and their safety, or should the government, should the industry do more to do that, to safeguard the interests of the passenger?
Yeah. Go ahead, Maria.
I think we continually need to monitor this. We need to make sure that no one who's a ticketed passenger who sits down on a seat in a flight gets removed from that flight just to be bumped for somebody else. We need that. We need to make sure that no one's captured on an airline for hours. If you're out on a tarmac and the plane's not leaving, that passengers have the ability to get off the flight as well. So there are things here that we need to continue to monitor. Yes, a digital age is making a lot of things apparent to people, but we want consumers to feel that they have rights.
Well, and I think that this is, we're adjusting as a society to social media generally, but I think this is, social media in these cases allows a lot of accountability. It also allows some significant passenger accountability. We saw an instance just in the last few days where there was a passenger who clearly was not behaving the way a passenger should behave. So both the passenger and the airlines knowing that somebody is watching what they're doing, I think it generally turned out to be a good thing, and it's made us address in our committee. Senator Cantwell and I had a hearing pretty quickly after the incident where someone was taken off an airline And it raised that whole question of overbooking, and is that a reasonable practice? And if it's a reasonable practice, is it unreasonable that the airlines would then need to be willing to do whatever it took to solve the problem that they had created? And at some point, somebody is going to be willing to get off that airline, in my opinion, for some amount of money, and just see this is a problem that we shouldn't let continue, and people that bought a ticket shouldn't be told they're not going to be allowed to fly. But there's a way to deal with a plane full of people that is oversold, and that's up to the airlines, I think, to figure that out in a way that passengers are feeling good about whatever was offered to them as a determination that they wouldn't be on that plane.
I want to ask the both of you about fees, which is something that comes up a lot when passengers book flights. There are baggage fees, there are change fees, there are all sorts of fees. Sometimes people will book flights and say, oh, I didn't know that I was going to pay for this fee or that fee. A couple of your colleagues, Senators Blumenthal and Markey, have introduced a plan that would prohibit these airlines from charging some of these fees if they think they're exorbitant or they're not justified. Is this a good idea, do you guys think? And is this something that Congress should explore? And is this a space that lawmakers should be wading into?
I think transparency is essential. Everybody wants to know what price they're going to pay, and they don't want to see hidden fees here. So transparency is a good idea. If you look at the airlines that are receiving the highest rankings right now, they're the airlines that really focus on trying to drive down fees for their consumers. And what we want to see is competition that is going to allow that, to continue to see people who are going to offer discount fees, and that that level of competition gives consumers a choice. So transparency and choice.
Well, I think transparency is the key here, where everything is available to you. Now, I don't think some of the proposals are reasonable, where if you're dealing with a travel agent, they'd have to read everything that is possibly available to know about that flight, but that's going to be available to you in multiple ways. Now, if you say, no, I don't have a computer, I don't have an iPhone, I don't have any way, and you want to go through every possible fee that could be charged or what could happen with that flight, that's an appropriate thing. But to say that you have to be sure you've verbally heard from someone selling you a ticket everything they need to possibly know, that's eventually going to add cost, and it's also going to mean you're not going to have the kind of help you might otherwise, in your case, think you need. But as long as that information is available, I think what Senator Cantwell said is the key to this. If people want to be on airlines that don't charge fees, and those airlines still have a competitive ticket price, they're going to choose that airline, and I think that's what we see happening. The less you see that you're going to be surprised by, the more willing you're able to take that second flight on the airline that's not full of surprises.
Let's talk a little bit about the big piece of legislation when it comes to the industry on Capitol Hill. That's, of course, the FAA reauthorization bill. It's quite a mouthful. It's passed the House. I wonder if the two of you could provide an update on where you see this legislation going in the Senate and what we can expect on the horizon this year.
Well, I think the good news there is that it's now in the public discussion about one of the things we hope to get to this summer and get finished. I think both Chairman Thune, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, and Senator Nelson, the ranking member, are both advocating that we get to that bill, as Senator Cantwell and I are. We need to have some understanding. There's a tax title. There are other reasons we need to have, I think, some at least broad understanding of how we're going to approach the bill and the time we would take on it. But we need to get that done. The biggest obstacle over the last year and a half has been what we do in terms of air traffic control and moving to the next generation of air traffic control. And there was, I think, a very healthy discussion of having a different system that would be more like the system in Canada, but that discussion just never produced the votes to get it done. And so that issue, I think, being out of the way and a willingness to find some way to be sure that we're all comfortable with pilot training are the two things that have held the bill back, that and the tax title. And I think we've got a broader base of interest in not just extending the current law, but actually getting the bill that we've worked on and the House has worked on to come to a compromise there that updates TSA procedures, that updates some of these fee and funding procedures.
Well, the good news is the discussion between the House and Senate is about 4 years or 5 years and not just a short-term extension. And so that's the good news. For us in the Northwest, SeaTac is the fastest growing airport in the United States and has been. And we need to continue to make the investments that are going to allow us to grow. We want to continue to make progress on what we call greener skies, the ability to have a clearer, shorter landing path and to have digitization of our air traffic control system. But we want the infrastructure investments that are going to allow us to serve this growth capacity. Airports are a key economic development tool for any community. Most businesses operate within 10 miles of an airport. So the United States continuing to give predictability in an FAA bill about how we're going to keep moving forward on that investment is really critical to our economic growth in the country.
I want to remind our viewers that if you want to submit a question for the senators, you can go on Twitter and use the hashtag #TakingFlight, and we'll try to get to some of those questions. Senator Blunt, you brought up the issue of air traffic control, and that was something that became a flashpoint in the FAA reauthorization bill debate in the House. There was an effort at one point to talk about privatizing the air traffic control system. What do you make of that argument, both of you, and do you think any discussion of that will resurface as this bill proceeds through the Senate?
Well, I think there's merit to looking at maybe a different way to have the structure, but that didn't seem, again, let me say, that just didn't produce the votes necessary to get it done. The Congress in about 10 years ago said we've got to move to a better system. We've got to move to a system that doesn't fly from tower to tower, but does this in a better way, has planes and passengers in the air less time, keeps better track of what's up there and knows where those planes are. And we need to do that. Now, to do that, if we're not going to have a different system, we need to figure out how to fund the improvement in the system we're moving toward. Last year, in the funding bill that we did at the end of the year, there's another $1 billion put into the air traffic funding amounts, and we think we'll do that another $1 billion again this year. Whether it's that $1 billion or some amount of money, if we're going to get to next gen by, I think the goal was 2025, but we're not much further along than we were 10 years ago. We have to figure out how to get there, and it will benefit safety, passengers, cost of flying, because you'll just know where planes are and have them in the air less time. So, and by the way, on safety, as Senator Cantwell mentioned, really the deregulation, the safety numbers have gotten better and better all the time, and we always hope there's never an aircraft problem or a loss of life or injury, and we saw a tragic loss of life not too long ago, but that's a very rare occasion in the country that has the most airline traffic in the world.
Well, Sean, to your question, fuel efficiency, fuel efficiency, fuel efficiency. Who benefits from fuel efficiency? The consumer, hopefully with lower fares. The business itself, our competitiveness. So moving towards and getting next gen implemented is all about the aviation industry taking the advantage of better fuel efficiency by more direct routes. So we want to see that happen. And the debate that's ensued over this private versus not private has really been more of who's going to represent us as you make those decisions on how to fund the implementation of next gen. I hope we can just get in a room and make progress on getting next gen done. I mentioned the Greener Skies initiative in the Northwest and the fact that our aviation has been able to get a lot of our flights landing this way and moving the efficiency. And I think, as Senator Blunt said, there's been some frustration that that's not happened in more spots in the United States to date. So the question is, having those sectors of our economy that help fund this aviation infrastructure be comfortable with how that's going to get done and to make sure that they're represented in those discussions in the future, that they have somebody to go to. Right now, a lot of people like the fact that they could come and have this in a public forum in the United States Congress and have this discussion. And people sometimes get anxious that if it's going to be this private sector entity, what's going to happen to them, and whether those fees are going to become exorbitant, and then they'll have no say in the matter. So look, I just want to accomplish the fact that next gen is critical to that efficiency, and it's going to help make us more competitive.
And on that topic, Sean, probably fuel is the biggest unpredictable cost in airline travel, and we've just been reading this week that jet fuel's going up, and airlines are figuring out if they need to adjust their ticket prices to that. And of course, by the time they adjust the ticket prices, airline fuel may be back down. But it is a big unpredictable. So the more you can make this system work in an efficient way, the more you take that unpredictable cost that I'm sure ticket costs try to anticipate what might happen. And the less you're worried about what might happen, the more you can be competitive on that ticket price.
So we're obviously in an election year right now, and air travel is something that voters all across the country go through, experience on a regular basis. Are there things, items potentially in the FAA bill, or maybe even outside of that you guys think would resonate with voters, that they care about, that could be an issue potentially that could make a difference on whether a voter votes for a candidate of one party or another this fall?
Well, I don't know if it's about whether somebody will vote for somebody, but I know this, that in our state, these issues of long lines and the dual goal of having security and making sure that our aviation centers are secure and to make sure that they're efficient. And so we have seen the utilization of canine units as a way to expedite the checking and security at our airport. It has been a huge success. So the FAA just does not have enough canine units to do all of that work. So Senator Blunt and I and Senator Thune and others have been working to improve the capacity of canine units throughout the United States. They are our best line of defense, but they also can go down a row of passengers who might be waiting, extra long time because of long lines, and clear that line in a matter of minutes. So what we're proposing is to say that airports can also make investments and meet the FAA standard for training of canine units. Now, we hope that this will be added to the package before it's finally passed. Part of this is also working with Homeland Security, but our air transportation system needs this level of efficiency. Plus, that canine, anybody who walks into the front door of that airport, that canine can detect explosives. They are a deterrent in and of themselves in just having them in the airport. So we want to see this massively upgraded in the United States, and we think that it works very, very well.
I think one of the things we've talked about, because when TSA comes in, when Homeland Security comes in, when airport managers come in, they understand how good dogs are here, and even some new ability to lease dogs, to not have the government have to be responsible for dog training and all of this. We can do this in a better way, and it does clear the lines. Something that in this discussion we're having now that hasn't been there before is drones in the air, and drone activity, and how much FAA responsibility there is. In some cases, what's the line between FAA and the Department of Defense? Drones can add a lot to the commercial opportunities in the air, but they also raise a lot of questions. Where are they? How do you be sure you keep them in a way that they don't interfere with commercial air travel? And then you get into the whole topic of how much oversight of your property do you want drones to have? In my view, virtually none. But how do you deal with that and have drone delivery and other things? And how do you identify every drone? When you're talking about putting thousands of things in the air in the next 5 years that aren't in the air today, how do you deal with that? And then how do you offset the cost? Is this a new obligation for people that are using drone delivery vehicles to to have to be part of the cost of the FAA. If the FAA is going to regulate them, the answer appears to be absolutely that should be part of that discussion. But it's an area that we're just now dealing with in the way that the future obviously requires us to deal with it.
Another thing I wanted to mention, I'll comment about drones, because we certainly want the FAA and the interoperability of those systems to keep moving forward in a safe and secure way. We have so many things that they're used for helping us with fighting fires and Coast Guard issues. But I don't know, anybody here has been through the airport with the automated conveyor system where you get a container and put your luggage on it and move through? I don't know if there are people here, but that is also being deployed across our airport. So, you know, the frustration, people get in the line and the person in front of you is taking, you know, you think, oh my gosh, I have to wait for this person to do all this. This new automated system, when you're ready, you move. You know, you stick your luggage on, you stick it on the conveyor belt, and it moves and you move. You can walk around people. So these kinds of automations are improving the speed at which people are also being able to be vetted through the secure system. And they also like it at TSA because then they can take luggage and better evaluate that. So all of these things that are helping us move people through the system are part of what we want to see as a continued improvement of the consumer experience, but we also want to make sure that the safety and security still remain there.
We have our first social media question for the two of you. Stacy on Twitter asks, what are we doing to protect the aviation grid from Russians and other countries hacking our infrastructure?
Well, this is a big issue because we do have state actors who are attacking our power system. So we want the Department of Energy, to play a very big leadership role working with other federal agencies to upgrade our cybersecurity. And this is an ongoing effort. Senator Murkowski and I have passed legislation out of the Senate. We hope our House colleagues would get more serious about this and take it up, because it's not just our air traffic control system, but it's other things that they are maneuvering through. I would say the FAA feels good about everyday experiences writ large, but we have to keep making improvements across our entire grid.
Well, cybersecurity, I'm on the Intel committee. That's probably the thing of greatest concern across the board, whether it's the financial structure, the aviation structure, the water infrastructure. So much is dependent now on having a system, a cyber system that works well. You know, one of the things we are, I'm sure, working on as a country would be trying to be sure we have more certainty about where an attack might come from. We're pretty good at defense. We have no real theory on offense. You know, how do you fight back? How do you make an attack on our critical infrastructure, an attack that someone wouldn't want to make or wouldn't want to see happen from their country, whether it was state-led or individually led? And this is a huge topic. If you want to really slow down America in a dramatic way and create health and safety issues, not just the airlines and the airspace, but cybersecurity is something that we have to be very focused on. It's the quickest way to bring our country to a standstill.
We're about a year and a half into the new administration, and I wonder if either of you detect any changes in this administration's approach to aviation, to security, to safety versus the last administration, and has it changed the way that Congress has worked with this administration on these issues? What are the big differences that we see? Well,
I am concerned about the president's trade policies. When we talk about aviation, Roy and I are sitting here talking about aviation, and we're today discussing a lot of the consumer issues. But aviation is a major employer in the United States of America. It employs over 100,000 people in the Northwest in what are manufacturing jobs of good middle-class wages. We don't want to lose that competition. So when we get into these, 50% of our planes are sold overseas into overseas markets, and you start putting tariffs on steel and aluminum, you start to have an impact. We don't want to see a trade war erupt and make the United States less competitive in that important aviation market?
I would think from the specific FAA point of view, Secretary Chow is going to be here later. She brings great skills to the Department of Transportation. We do need to do a better job filling the jobs that need to be filled by the President. But I detect a continued increase in engagement on security issues, on the issues that make people feel as safe as they can possibly feel about flying. I just think the more we get in the post 9/11 world, the more we're all comfortable with the importance of that goal, and also asking the questions that need to be asked. And generally, I think the answers have been pretty good. There's always some hiring concerns. We're going to have a pilot concern in future years. The pilots that were trained by the government in World War II and Korea and Vietnam are retiring. I know one of the airlines recently put a pattern in place where they're going to be training more of their own pilot, or training more pilots and encouraging pilots to be trained. That's one of the things we need to be thinking about. But generally, I think we just continue to hopefully get better and demonstrably better at the parts of air travel that the government is obligated to be responsible for.
And along those same lines, we only have a couple of minutes left, but you raise an interesting point, Senator Blunt. I often hear about a pilot shortage around the country. Are there other macro steps that can be taken to address that? And how do we explain what's going on in terms of the number of pilots versus the demand for?
Well, it was one of the training, we had this hours of service or a training discussion. That's one of the things that's held the FAA bill back a little bit, is trying to reach a conclusion there as to about how much training and what kind of training is the right training to put a pilot in the air. But these are good jobs. They're going to be very competitive jobs in the near term as pilots do retire. And I think the airlines themselves are, for the first time, taking more responsibility and looking at what they need to be thinking about to be sure that people can get the training they need, have access to the loans they, in most cases, need to have to get it, and then have the kind of jobs that allow those loans to be paid back. We want good pilots in the air. We want lots of people prepared to do a job that takes lots of people. And I think we're seeing a number of things happen now to meet that pilot shortage. I believe there's a pilot shortage. Most of the airlines do, particularly in the regional airline areas. Finding the people you need that have the skills you need, very important.
That regional issue is the real issue. That obviously the big carriers can do well and attract the people that they want to attract, but then you have these regional airlines, and so we have to focus on what are the tools that can be used to continue to build that pipeline. We never want to shortchange on the training. Captain Sullenberg gave testimony to our hearing. I think it was one of the most dramatic testimonies ever, where he said, you know what, when it's you and the co-pilot sitting next to you, sometimes you don't even have time to communicate.
Right.
You're just going to do your job and they're going to do their job. And after the Colgan Air incident, which was a regional carrier in which a woman from the Northwest was one of the co-pilots and lost her life, we need to do better at training. So let's focus on what we can do to make sure the regional carriers continue to get a workforce for the future.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have. Senator Cantwell, Senator Blunt, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Lori Aratani, who's going to have our next discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much.